Last week, I typed a question I actually cared about into a search box. Not a trivia question, not what year did that happen? A real one. The kind where the answer was going to change what I did next. Like, would I seek medical attention kind of change? I typed it out, I hit return, and about 4 seconds later, I had a paragraph back. Clean, organized, three bullet points and a caveat at the end, which made it feel pretty honest. I read it, I nodded, I closed the tab. That's the whole story. There's no twist. I asked, I got an answer, I moved on. And the reason I'm telling you about it is that I've spent a decade building a life around questions, and I did not notice, not for 1 second, that anything had happened. There's a study I learned about that takes a closer look at this common scenario. Two researchers at Wharton, Shiri Malumad and Jin Ho Yoon, ran several experiments with more than 10,000 people. The setup was simple: learn about a topic. Something ordinary, the how to plant a vegetable garden kind of thing. Half the participants learned about it through an AI summary. The other half learned about it the old way: a page of links, click around, read a few sources, put it together yourself. Same facts, same information, just two different roads to it, and those that we've experienced ourselves. Then they asked everybody to give advice to a friend based on what they had learned. The people who learned from the AI summary gave shorter advice, less original advice, advice that looked a lot like everybody else's. And then when the researchers handed off all of that advice to 1,500 independent evaluators, people who had no idea where any of it came from, those evaluators rated the AI-informed advice as less helpful, less informative, and less trustworthy. They were less willing to act on it. And here's the part that I found intriguing. The researchers ran another version, same AI summary, but this time with live web links sitting right there alongside it. The original sources, one click away, the door propped open. Almost nobody went through it. The knowledge came out just as shallow. I want to sit with that for a second because I think that's the most important finding in the whole paper, and it isn't the one on the headline. It wasn't that people couldn't get to the sources, it's that once the answer arrived, the wanting stopped. Now, we've talked a lot about curiosity and questions opening loops. Here, the loop closed. The hunger that sent people looking in the first place got fed, and a fed hunger doesn't click. Today, I want to talk about the second click, the one almost nobody makes, why it's disappearing, what it's costing us, and what I learned about it from a man on a street corner in Northeast D.C. who gave me a fake name, and then, 15 minutes later, gave me his real one. I want to start with a number, and then I want to argue with it a little. Rand Fishkin's team at SparkToro tracked search behavior through the first months of this year. 68% of Google searches now end without a single click. You search, you look, you leave. And when Google puts an AI overview at the top of the page, that box summary that answers the question before you've scrolled, that number climbs to 83%. So 83 out of 100 people never leave the results page. And all the people who see an AI overview, roughly 1 in 100 clicks through to one of the sources it drew from. 1. I've mentioned some version of these numbers in this show before, and every time I do, I can feel the shape the conversation wants to take. It wants to become a lament about artificial intelligence. It wants me to be the guy who tells you the machines are making us stupid. I mostly won't do that. And not because I'm being diplomatic. I use these tools on a regular basis. They're extraordinary. The answers are often better than what I'd have written myself with an afternoon and a library card, and anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't used them seriously. The quality of the answer is not the problem. The problem is the half second afterwards. because something did genuinely change. And it wasn't the intelligence of the machine, it was the economics of the answer. For about 25 years, an answer was a destination. You went and got it. You typed something into a box and you received it. In return, not an answer, but a list of places where an answer might live. 10 blue links, and then you did the work. You clicked, you skimmed, you hit a paywall, you backed out, you clicked something else, and you found two sources that disagreed, and you had to decide which one you believed. That was friction, and we hated it, and it was doing something to us the entire time. It was making us choose. Every one of those little decisions, this source, not that one, this claim seems solid, that one seems thin. Every one of those was in fact a tiny act of judgment. Nobody experienced it as thinking. It felt like the annoying part before the thinking. But that friction was where the knowledge got built, because you built it. Melamed and Yoon's whole explanation for their result comes down to this. When the machine does the synthesizing, you don't. We don't. And synthesis was never the overhead cost of learning. Synthesis was the learning. Now, the answer isn't a destination. It's a delivery. It arrives at the doorstep folded with the caveats already attached. And I want to be fair here, because this is not the first time. Plato has Socrates tell the story in the Phaedrus about the god who invents writing and brings to the king of Egypt, expecting to be thanked. The king isn't thankful at all. He says, "You haven't given us memory, you've given us a reminder of memory. People will read many things and know nothing. They'll seem wise and mostly be ignorant." That was about the alphabet. We've been here with the calculator. We've been here with GPS, and that one's not a metaphor. There's real evidence that turn-by-turn navigation changes what your hippocampus does, because London cabbies who spent years building the map in their heads end up with measurably different brains than the rest of us. Each time we handed a capacity to a tool, and mostly it was fine. I cannot do long division on paper anymore, and I have made peace with it. I would like the airline pilot to keep using the instruments. Here's what I think is different. Every previous offload took over the labor. The calculator does the arithmetic. The GPS does the route finding. The machine takes a task you understand and performs it faster than you can. This one takes over the judgment. Not the gathering, not the sorting, the part where you look at what's in front of you and decide what it means, what's missing, what doesn't add up, which you'd need to know before you'd act on it. The evaluation part, the part where the second question gets born. And here's why that's significant. The second question doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from friction, from the gap between two sources that don't agree, from the sentence that sits wrong, from the part of the explanation that's suspiciously smooth. That's where you go, wait. And wait is the beginning of every real question anybody has ever asked. A good synthesis has no gaps. That's what makes it good. It reads like one voice, confident and coherent, and it never shows you the seam where the two sources disagreed because it resolved that for you before you saw it. So the answer arrives fluent, complete, and there's nothing to catch on. The door opens, the bus is right there. 83 out of 100 people board it. Two researchers at Wharton, Shaw and Nave, have put a name to this on paper this year, and the name is a good one because it's uncomfortable. They call it cognitive surrender. And the reason it's uncomfortable is the word surrender, which implies something you did rather than something that happened to you. Their argument isn't about people using AI to work faster. That's just tools. Their argument is about the line people cross when the machine stops accelerating the decision and actually starts making it. I'd put the distinction this way. There's a difference between delegating and abdicating. When I delegate, I still own the outcome. I hand off the work and then I check it because it's still mine. When I abdicate, I hand off the ownership. I'm not checking anyone. The answer came back, and the answer is now simply what's true. And my role has quietly changed from author to recipient. Nobody announces that transition. There's no moment where you decide to stop thinking. It's just that the answer was good, and you were busy, and it was Thursday. Now, put that next to a second piece of research, because the two of them together are what actually got me to sit down and write this episode. SurveyMonkey ran their State of Curiosity report this year, and the phrase that came out of it has been rattling around in my head. Workplaces are becoming answer rich and question poor. Answers everywhere, questions nowhere. Two findings in particular. The first, about 7 in 10 workers say they need psychological safety before they'll ask a question at work, which, fine. That's not really new. Anybody who sat in a conference room knows the calculus. Asking a question in front of people is an admission. You're saying out loud in front of your peers, I don't know this. People have been swallowing questions in meetings since there have been meetings. But the second finding is what really got my attention. Leaders route their questions through AI at roughly 3 times the rate of individual contributors. 3 times. Did you catch that part? The people in the organization with the most permission to ask, the ones who could ask anything of anyone, who cannot be punished for not knowing, whose entire job is arguably to ask the question nobody else is positioned to ask, are the ones most likely to ask the machines instead. And I understand exactly why, because I spent decades in federal service and I watched myself do a version of it. Asking a person costs you something. It costs status. It puts a small dent in the story that you're the one who knows. Asking the machine costs nothing. The machine never raises an eyebrow. The machine will never mention it later. And the machine will never, ever make you look like the person who didn't know. So the questions don't disappear. They get rerouted away from the people who could have given the messy, contested, situated answer toward the thing that gives you a clean one. And every one of those reroutes is a conversation that didn't happen. It's a missed opportunity. I want to be careful not to let this land as new, because it isn't. The vulnerability has always been there. Ari Kruglansky spent his career on what he called the need for cognitive closure, the human hunger for a firm answer, any firm answer over the discomfort of ambiguity. He found that under time pressure, under fatigue, under noise, that hunger spikes. We grab the first answer that fits, and we stop looking. He called the tail end of it freezing, which I think is exactly the right word. The mind seizes on the answer and locks. It's not a modern condition. That's equipment. We all come with it. What's new is that we now have built technology optimized to satisfy that hunger instantly, on demand, at zero cost, at the exact moment it's most acute. We didn't invent the vulnerability, we just built the perfect key for it. And here's the thing about closure. It doesn't feel like a failure. It feels good. It feels like completion. The brain can check another box, give itself an attaboy, and divert resources elsewhere. That's the trap. The moment of surrender is indistinguishable from the inside, from the moment of understanding. Which brings me to the intervention. And I love this one because it's almost embarrassingly small. Mary Budd Rao was an education researcher in the 70s who did something nobody had bothered to do. She got a stopwatch and measured how long teachers wait after asking a question before they say something else. Repeat it, rephrase it, answer it themselves, or call on someone. The answer? About 1 second. 1 second is what we grant a child to think. Then, She had teachers extend it, not to a minute, but to a mere 3 seconds. And everything changed for the better. Student answers got longer, more students volunteered, the number of kids who said nothing at all dropped. Answers got more speculative, more maybe and what if and could it be that? Teachers' own questions got better, and the students started asking questions of their own. 3 seconds. That's the whole intervention. 2 extra seconds of silence, and a room full of people who were receiving answers turned into a room full of people generating questions. So let's put the two halves of this act together. The cost of cognitive surrender is not wrong answers. If it were wrong answers, we'd have caught it by now. Wrong answers announce themselves eventually. Something breaks, somebody notices. The cost is the second question that never got asked. And you'll never notice that cost, not once, not ever, because a question that doesn't get asked leaves no evidence. There's no error message, no gap in the record. There's just a slightly smaller life that you experienced as a completely normal one. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of this episode. Not the surrender, the refusal. As I said, 83% never leave the page. 1 in 100 follow the source. I've been carrying those numbers around, and while reviewing conversations from my DC walk, I realized why they felt so familiar. It wasn't the internet they reminded me of. It was a man I met on a corner in Northeast on a Tuesday on Walk 71. Some of you know the project. 2 years, 1 day a week, walking every single street in Washington, D.C., 2,085 miles, every block, every alley, every dead end. I wore a sandwich board that invited people to talk to me, which is a profoundly stupid thing to do, and also the best decision I ever made. 1,323 conversations with strangers. Walk 71, a man came at me hard. He looked at the sign, he looked up at me and said, "What do you know about being black?" And the honest answer was nothing. Nothing at all. He told me his brother had been killed by police. Across the street, he pointed at the spot. He told me about another family member lost to gun violence. He was angry in the way that people are angry when the anger has been fully earned and nobody has ever sat still long enough to receive it. I'd love to say that I had some special technique for the moment. I didn't. I just didn't leave. We ended up walking blocks together. He was walking and eating his lunch and asked me to pay for it as a way to call my bluff. I pulled out my phone and sent him $20 on Cash App, which he flatly did not believe I would do. He'd given me the handle the way you give someone a handle when you're testing whether they're the kind of person who follows through, which is to say, expecting nothing. And somewhere in there, I told him my name, Kenneth. His eyes went wide because his name is Kenneth too. He had told me a street name, which I will change to Dexter for this recording. Dexter is the name he gives people he doesn't know. It's the name he gives people he doesn't expect to stay. He had handed me a summary version of himself in the first 10 seconds because his entire life had taught him what the completion rate is on strangers. Dexter is the AI overview. Kenneth is behind the click, and almost nobody clicks. I did not earn that name by being good at questions. I earned it by not leaving. The second question wasn't clever. I don't think there was a second question exactly. There was just a refusal to treat the first answer as the whole answer, sustained over time until the man decided the door could be safely opened. Here's what gets me. He had run the numbers before I ever showed up. He had a whole architecture built, a false front, a name at the counter, because he had measured over a lifetime roughly what percentage of people stay past the first answer. And whatever number he had arrived at, it was low enough to justify building the front. 83% never leave the page. He knew that ratio. He just knew it about people. Now, I have to tell you about the other kind of story, or this whole episode feels like a lie. Same season, Eastern Market. A couple walked past me, saw the sign, and one of them said, quote, "All lives matter." Not to me exactly, but out loud, in my direction, the way people do when they want you to hear it, but not respond. And I thought about engaging. I thought about it, and I chickened out. Those are the words I wrote in my notes that night. There are more. A woman at a memorial for people lost to addiction, where the right question, "Where have you been this whole time?" arrived in my head about 4 blocks after I had walked away. A group of boys who invited me to come play at the park. I looked at my remaining mileage and chose the miles. And I've thought about those boys more times than I can count. Walk 83, where my own note read, I fell into the trap of answering vice responding with a question. That's the man in the sandwich board. Mid-pilgrimage, full-time, on the record, professionally curious, taking the summary and moving on. I tell you that not as a confession beat, well, partly as a confession beat, but because it's the load-bearing wall of this entire episode. This is not a trait I have. It's not a virtue I acquired somewhere around mile 400 and get to keep. It's a move you make or don't make one time in a particular moment, and then the moment is gone and there's another one coming. I lose about as often as I win, which is exactly what makes it teachable. If it were a character trait, you'd either have it or you wouldn't. But a move you can practice. There's one more story, and it's not mine. Walk 92. A man passed me on the sidewalk. Friendly, warm, no hostility in it at all. And said something like, "Remember, your life also matters," and kept walking. Loop closed, summary delivered, moving on. He got into his car, and his partner, sitting next to him, told him that what he had said undercut the very message that I was walking for. And he got out of the car, and he came back. I'll call him Daniel here. I wrote in my notes that night that I was dumbstruck, that of everything that happened that day, his example was what stayed with me, because that's the rarest thing in the entire data set. 1,300 conversations, and I can count on one hand the number of times I watched somebody reopen a loop they had already closed. Walking back towards a conversation you've already successfully ended is socially expensive in a way that's hard to overstate. Everything in us is built to keep walking. And notice who asked the second question. Not me. I never got the chance. It was his partner, in the car, in private. And what Daniel had was not the skill to ask, but the humility to receive it. So the second click isn't only a discipline for the person asking. Sometimes it's a willingness to be unsummarized by somebody who loves you. I want to close the act with something structural, because it took me longer to see it and about 10 minutes to understand once I did. I'll call her Ty. She was sitting on a bench, and the first time I walked past, she smiled. The second time I walked past, she watched me. The third time I walked past, because covering every segment of an intersection means you keep coming back and back again, this time she had questions for me. And then out came her story. She had moved home to take care of her elderly mother, whose health was failing. She was working on her GED. That conversation does not exist on a single pass. And here's what I finally understand about the whole project. Walking every street made me structurally incapable of the single pass. A normal walk is one look, one summary, one impression, gone. But every street, every alley, every dead end meant that I came through the same neighborhoods over and over, and people got a second and third look at the strange man with the sign. And the conversations happened disproportionately on the later passes. There's a woman in my notes recorded as seen 3 times. There's Rawl, who became an actual friend across several re-encounters. And there's a note I wrote once when my GPS glitched and I lost a stretch I'd already covered, so I had to rewalk it. And instead of being annoyed, I wrote that I was looking forward to meeting whoever I had missed as a result of the software failure. I was grateful for the failure of the machine because the failure gave me a second pass. 24 months, 2,085 miles, and the thing I actually built without ever intending to was a 2-year argument against the single pass. So here's where I've landed. Shah and Nave name the surrender. That's real work. You can't fight a thing that doesn't have a name, and now the thing has a name. But the refusal doesn't have a name, and that seems backward to me, because the refusal is the part a person can actually do, the action, the skill to be improved. We've named the failure premature closure. We've named the trait intellectual perseverance, which philosophers have been working on carefully for years. We've named the classroom version wait time. We've named the medical version the diagnostic timeout. Every discipline has named its own local dialect of this. Nobody has named the act itself, the portable one, the one that's the same move whether you're a physician looking at a chart, or a teacher counting to 3, or a man on a sidewalk who's been handed a name he suspects isn't real. I've spent weeks trying to name it. I've got a folder of candidates, and I've rejected every one of them. So I'm going to do something I haven't done on the show before. I'm going to leave it unnamed, on purpose, and hand it to you. It's not modesty, and it's not a bit. It's the only move that's consistent with everything I've just said. A word that gets handed down from a podcast is a word people quote. A word a field arrives at together is a word people use. I'd rather have the second one. Here's what I think it has to do, and these are the constraints I couldn't satisfy myself. It has to name the act, not the trait. The thing you do on a Tuesday, not the kind of person you are. It has to work in a hospital, a classroom, a boardroom, and a kitchen without translation. And it has to have a verb in it. If you can't do it, it's not a practice, it's a poster. Send it to me, put it in the comments, wherever you're listening. If you're the one who names it, you'll hear your name on the show and it'll be in the record from here forward. Because 10 years from now, somebody's going to ask where the word came from, and I want the honest answer to be a listener. Right now, there's a real thing with no name on it. You're in that space this second. Sit in it for a minute, please, before you reach for a word. That discomfort you're feeling, that's the entire subject of this episode. And while you're thinking about it, here's the practice for the week. Inevitably, you're going to be handed a summary of a search, of a situation, of a person. The answer will arrive, complete and fluent and seamless. With the caveats already attached, the door will open, the bus will be right there. 83 out of 100 people board it. Once. Just once. Don't. Ask the second question. Stay past the first answer. Stay long enough to find out who's standing behind the street name. His name was Kenneth. So's mine. That's the episode. If you want the sources, the Malamud and Yoon paper, the Spark Toro data, the Shah and Nave work on a cognitive surrender, the SurveyMonkey report, they're all in the show notes, with links, and I'd encourage you to click one. I recognize the irony of asking, but do it anyway. And if you've got a story about a second click you've made, or one you didn't, I want to hear it. It's not a call to action, that's an actual request. I'm still working out what this is. I'm Ken Woodward, and this is Curated Questions. And the question I'll leave you with, as always, what question are you avoiding that would change everything? Keep questioning.